There's a reason the ancients feared the sky. Not the stars, not the comets, not even the thunder, but something deeper, colder, more enduring. Something that moved slow, like a god with no need to chase. Something whose rings shimmered like chains. They called it Saturn, but they did not worship it. They survived it. In Babylon, it was an inert, the warlord of finality. In Rome, Saturnus, the devourer of his own children. In occult temples, it bore no name, only the symbol, a sickle and a square. The architects knew, the priests remembered. The cube, the ring, the eye that doesn't blink. It was not just a planet, it was a law, boundary, trap. Before time was measured by machines, it was Saturn that ruled the clock. It's not metaphorically, literally. It was the furthest visible planet to the ancients, the one that marked the edge of reality. Past it, there were no god zone, only the unknown. So Saturn became the sentinel, the watcher, the limit. But what it watched was not the stars. It watched us. It's not out of interest, out of necessity, because Saturn is the god of containment, of delay, of recursion. It is the loop you can't break, the test you can't pass until you stop trying. And in many traditions, it is not just a celestial body, it is a metaphysical structure, a control system, a resonance prison for the soul. The idea sounds absurd until you begin to notice the pattern. Across cultures, Saturn is linked to time, judgment, and death. The Greeks called it Kronos, not just the god of time, but time itself. Kronos devoured his children because time devours all, and yet Saturn was not cast as evil. It was sacred in a terrifying way, brought structure, discipline, cause, and effect. It punished, but it also taught. It was the boundary within which all experience was allowed to unfold. But some say the boundary became a barrier. Some say Saturn was hijacked. In modern occultism, there is a whisper suggestion that Saturn is not just the god of limitation, but the architect of illusion. That it governs not only karma, but reincarnation. That the wheel of samsara, the endless cycle of birth and death, is not a natural law, but a system, a machine. And Saturn is the administrator, the frequency that keeps the soul looping, recycling, returning, not out of love, not out of evolution, out of design, containment field wrapped in mythology. The Gnostics hinted at this. They spoke of archons, false rulers, psychic parasites pretending to be gods. They said the demiurge created a false reality, a mimicry of the true. And above this prison sky, Saturn ruled. Cold, geometric, implacable. The Catholic Church absorbed Saturn's imagery, the black robes, the square hats, the obsession with sin and time and guilt. It called it order. But it was the same law. Saturn always wears a mask of formality. Behind it, inertia, decay, the slow collapse into repetition. You see it everywhere. The black cube of Mecca, and the cube worn on the forehead of Jewish prayer, the Saturnine rings of elite architecture. Even in pop culture, the same forms echo the cube, the circle, the eye, the Saturn V rocket, the Saturn car company. Why? Because symbols are not passive. They transmit, they imprint, they remind. Saturn is the great reminder of limits. Even when you forget, it remembers. But not all limits are prisons. Some are thresholds. And this is where the myth fractures. Because for thousands of years, Saturn was both feared and honored. It was seen as the keeper of gates, as the ruler of the Golden Age, the god who reigned before Zeus, before the lightning. In the esoteric mystery schools, Saturn is both the warden and the keyholder. He crushes illusions, but also protects the path to awakening through suffering, through renunciation, through mastery of time. So which is it, tyrant or teacher, trap or trial? The answer is yes. Saturn is the force that compresses, that narrows, that denies, and in doing so, it prepares, grinds the soul into precision. But there are those who say this preparation has become perversion, that what once served as the final gate has become a recursive loop, that the reincarnation cycle is no longer evolution, but entrapment, that Saturn, once a gate to ascension, has become the guardian of amnesia, and the proof, they say, is in the resonance. Saturn emits a sound, a frequency. NASA recorded it. Deep, droning howl, like a signal from a machine older than speech. This is not imagination. This is physics. Saturn is the only planet with a hexagon storm at its pola, perfect six-sided vortex that never ends. Geometry in motion, a cube unfolding into a storm. And storms in mythology are never just weather. They are messages, warnings, engines of change. So what happens when a soul dies? And where does it go, many traditions say? To the light. Else some whisper. That light is a trick, a recycling mechanism, a memory wipe. And Saturn, with its rings like razor wire, is the last stop before rebirth. It filters, it tests, or it resets. But if this is true, if we are looping through lifetimes not by divine design, but by manipulation, then who built the machine? Who benefits? And most importantly, how do you break it? In part 2, we descend deeper into the cult of Saturn, the secret societies that venerate it, the rituals masked as religion, the black cubes that litter our cities, and the frequency war being fought through symbols because Saturn doesn't hide, just hides in plain sight. Once you see it, the question isn't whether you believe, it's whether you were ever meant to forget. They call it Saturn worship, but there are no open temples, no Sunday sermons, no hymns sung to the rings, and yet it surrounds us. And not in the way a religion surrounds, but like a current under the skin of civilization. Like something older than empire, hiding inside empire, code, a frequency. A cult without a name that speaks in shape and silence, not prayer. And if you know how to look, if you know how to remember, you begin to see it. In the architecture, in the black, cubes in the robes of judges and popes, in the rituals masked as pageantry and the repetition we call tradition. Because the cult of Saturn never died, it simply changed clothes. To understand how it survived, you have to go back not just to Rome, but before. Before gods had names. Before theology became a weapon. In ancient Mesopotamia, Saturn was Ninurd, the god of boundaries and fate. In Egypt, it was associated with Set, the god of isolation, storms. In the Western horizon where the sun dies each night. In the Hellenistic world, Saturn became Kronos, the devourer of time. And in Rome, Saturnus, the god of sowing and harvest, but also sacrifice. The Feast of Saturnalia honored him not with solemnity, but chaos roll, reversals, masks, release from order. For 1 week, the slaves ruled. The rules were inverted, and then it all ended. Order returned. We had said if to say, you may taste freedom, but only under the eye of the clock. When Christianity rose, it didn't erase Saturn. It absorbed him, transmuted him. Saturn's symbols were folded into the church, the black robes of judges and priests, the square mortarboards of academia, the obsession with guilt, sin, penance, and time. Even the architecture of cathedrals mirrored the Saturnine geometry, repetitive, rigid, echoing cycles. And above them all, the dome, the ring, the imitation of heaven locked into stone. See, Saturn's cult never needed to be public. It only needed to be remembered by the few and forgotten by the many. That is the true priesthood one that functions in shadow, that governs by resonance. Not overt control, but symbolic saturation. And so the cube appears again and again. The Kaaba and Mecca black stone at the center of spiritual gravity. The tefillin worn by devout Jews, a black cube bound to the forehead. The UN meditation rumen, altarless black cube in a temple of silence. Corporate logos, film imagery, hidden geometries and city design. Why the cube? Because it is Saturn's geometry, the three-dimensional expression of the hexagon, the storm at the pole, the shape of control and containment, a symbol of perfect order, and perfect order in a broken world becomes prison. But this is not just history, it is an active system. The modern cult of Saturn lives through systems, institutions, hierarchies. It governs through cycles, economic collapses, wars, rebirths, always returning, always repeating. This is not conspiracy theory, it is conspiratorial pattern. A pattern that worships time as weapon. It uses delay, limitation, karma as tools to wear down the soul. And at the top, beyond governments, beyond corporations or symbols. Because the true rulers do not wield laws. They wield meaning. Saturn is not just a planet. It is the archetype of restriction, and the cult of Saturn venerates restriction as sacred. The Saturnian mind sees suffering as virtue, limitation as truth, obedience as holiness. And so you are born, baptized, educated, taxed, sedated, distracted, and finally buried, having never left the loop. The ritual is complete. You are processed, not lived. But here's the twist. The Saturn cult does not seek chaos. It fears it. Chaos is freedom. And so, every chaos must be ritualized, contained, inverted. Even rebellion becomes costume. Even revolution is scheduled. Even your awakening is marketed, because nothing is more dangerous to Saturn than unstructured consciousness. A mind that remembers itself as formless. And yet, in the deeper mystery schools, Saturn is not cast only as jailer, it is also gatekeeper. Because Saturn represents the last veil, the final guardian before transcendence. In Kabbalah, Saturn corresponds to binary understanding, the womb of form, the mother of structure. Before you return to the formless, you must pass through structure. You must master the form. The trap becomes the test. The cube becomes the door. This is the secret the cult hides. Saturn is not evil, but those who weaponize Saturn are terrified of what comes after it, because beyond Saturn is Uranus sky without end. Beyond structure is freedom, and that freedom cannot be taxed, cannot be taught, cannot be sold. It simply is. So the cult keeps you here, in rings, in squares, in oaths, in fear. But symbols have a strange property. The more they are repeated, the more they reveal themselves. And the black cube, once feared, once hidden, now speaks louder than ever. It no longer imprisons, it invites. It asks not for your worship, but your vision. What will you do when you see the pattern? Will you call it madness, or will you remember what you were before time had a name? In part 3, we enter the geometry itself, the hexagon storm, the cube's esoteric unfolding, and how Saturn's frequency shapes not just time, but memory. Because if they can shape memory, they can erase truth. But only if you let them. Look at Saturn, and you see rings. But listen to Saturn, and you hear something else entirely. Not silence, not emptiness. A sound, a pulse. A mechanical hum older than your language, deeper than your heartbeat. NASA recorded at a frequency emanating from the planet's poles, as if the entire body of Saturn were a bell and something somewhere struck it long ago. The sound is not random, it's tonal, cyclical, structured, as if Saturn were broadcasting something not just through space, but through time, not information, not instruction, but a rhythm, a loop. And what does rhythm do? It entrains, it aligns. In humans, rhythm becomes habit. Habit becomes belief. Belief becomes prison. They called it Kronos for a reason. Not just as the god of time, but as the god of the rhythm of time. Time is judgment. Time is law. Time is memory. You see, memory does not exist outside of time. It is the product of sequence. One moment after another, arranged. Meaning is in the order, not the content. And if Saturn rules the order, then Saturn rules memory. And if memory is shaped, then identity can be rewritten. The storm at Saturn's North Pole is a perfect hexagon. It's not an approximation. It's a geometrically consistent six-sided vortex, self-sustaining, permanent. It should not exist. Nothing in nature holds that shape under that condition for that long. And yet, there it is. A storm shaped like a symbol, a portal that never opens, a machine encoded in atmosphere. And what is a hexagon but a cube, unfolded and viewed from above? What is a cube but structure, boundary, and recursion made flesh? In ancient esoteric systems, the cube was not a shape, it was a state, a level of consciousness. To be in the cube was to be in matter, in time, in causality. A soul trapped in incarnation, looped through density until realization. The cube was Saturn's domain, but it wasn't evil, it was necessary, until it wasn't, because something happened. Somewhere along the spiral of history, the structure solidified. The doorway became a wall, the storm became static. And now, Saturn's resonance is not just shaping matter, it is feeding illusion, binding memory, looping souls. Gnostic said, "This world is not real. It is a construct built by a lesser god, the demiurge, to trap divine sparks. The body is a cage, time is a trick, and the gate out is guarded." They spoke in symbols because symbols bypass the jailer. The hexagon, the cube, the storm, all speak to the same truth. Memory is not your own. It was given, installed, replayed. You do not remember your first breath not because it was erased, but because it was overwritten. Think of your dreams. How often do they begin in the middle, with a context you didn't choose but simply accepted? That is Saturn's fingerprint. It's a seamless entry into a reality you didn't build but believe anyway. Because memory is not what happened. It is what you can access. And access is controlled by resonance, so they saturate the field with symbols, with rituals, with language. They place the cube in your architecture. It's in your media, in your rituals disguised as routine. The boardroom, the courtroom, the classroom. All squares, all repetition. All reinforcing the same rhythm. Sit, obey, forget, but not all is lost. Because geometry is a language, and language can be read both ways. The cube has 6 faces, 6 directions, 6 limitations. But it also contains the 7th, the center, the still point, the axis mundi, the observer, soul. And when the soul remembers its stillness, the cube begins to unfold. Not physically, internally, perceptually. The walls bend, the memory loosens. What seemed like destiny becomes pattern, and what seemed like identity becomes mask. In sacred geometry, the cube unfolds into a cross. 6 faces laid flat. It's a map of sacrifice, yes, but also of resurrection. Because what has been bound can be unbound. What was written can be rewritten, but only if you stop repeating, stop obeying the rhythm. Hear the sound of Saturn and then silence it. How? By remembering. Not events, not facts, but the space between thoughts, the witness, the presence, the moment that is not time, that is not bound by hexagons or storms, that cannot be digitized or diagrammed. The soul is not memory. It is that which remembers. That remembering is what the Saturn cult fears most. Because when enough begin to remember, the rhythm breaks, the resonance shifts, the storm unspools. The cube dissolves, not in space, but in you. And when the inner cube collapses, the outer has no power. But make no mistake, they will not let go easily. The resonance is protected, guarded, not just by symbols, but by systems. Technological, financial, educational, legal, all designed to feed the rhythm, to punish the pause, to mock the silence. So you must become the silence, not passive, not submissive. Still like the eye of the storm, like the center of the hexagon, like the soul before memory. That is where the door is. That is where Saturn ends. In part 4, we trace the symbols of Saturn into our world, the black cube of Mecca, the hidden hexagrams in corporate logos, the architecture of the elite, and the rituals that reenact the loop. Because what was once hidden in temples now parades as culture. But only if you forget how to see. They said the age of gods was over, but symbols were relics, inert and harmless. But what if the opposite were true? What if symbols are not things we remember, but things that remember us? What if the shapes that surround us are not echoes of belief, but tools of reinforcement broadcasting, meaning not to the mind, but to the subconscious? You don't need to understand a symbol for it to affect you. You only need to see it, again and again, till it becomes invisible, till it becomes truth. This is the secret of Saturn's cult. It doesn't need your belief, only your repetition. Start with the black cube. You've seen it, even if you never knew what it was. In Mecca, millions circled the Kaaba blackstone cube believed to house a fragment from heaven. In Jewish ritual, the tefillin binds a black cube to the forehead and arm, close to mind and heart. In Manhattan, a massive black cube rotates in a plaza with no plaque. In the UN meditation room, a dark altar of dense iron sits alone in a triangular chamber, dedicated to the god man worships without knowing. All cubes, all anchors, not idols, but devices. Why the cube? Because it is Saturn's geometry. The unfolded cube becomes the cross, the symbol of sacrifice, of intersection, of crucifixion, of spirit into matter. But as a solid, the cube becomes containment, fixed space, 6 walls, no exit. The perfect metaphor for the soul and cycle. And when you circle it, pray to it, align with it, you reinforce the loop, even if you mean something else. Intent matters, but structure overrides. And the cult knows this. You see it in logos. Think of the Saturn car company. What does a vehicle have to do with an ancient god? Nothing unless you understand the symbolic ritual of embedding resonance into utility. Think of the hexagon used in branding, architecture, design, 6 sides, symmetry, echoes of the polar storm. The hexagon is everywhere because it shapes perception without consent, like a glyph too old to resist. You see it in rings, Olympic rings, wedding rings, Saturn's rings, eternal return, a binding of soul to form through agreement. Even entertainment carries Saturn's fingerprint. Consider how the most popular franchises are loops. Reboots, remakes, sequels, not progress recursion. Art imitating the cosmic trap. And you wonder why it feels like nothing really changes. Even in city planning, the geometry returns. Washington, D.C., Vatican City, London all, with central obelisks, domes, Masonic grid lines. The dome is the ring, the obelisk is the axis. Saturn above, Earth below. A mirror of cosmic containment. Ritual built into skyline, and then there are the robes, the black gowns of graduates, the square mortarboard hats, judges in black, priests in black. These are not accidents of fashion. They are Saturnian vestments, uniforms of roles within systems designed to reinforce authority, limitation, and delay. Why does a student wear the same colors as a judge? Because both are agents of the same structure. Time, initiation, reward through obedience. The cult of Saturn is not a shadowy cabal meeting in candlelit rooms. It is a consciousness, frequency that has embedded itself in culture so completely that to resist it feels insane. You are told to trust structure, to revere the past, to delay pleasure, to obey rules you didn't write. And all of this is sold to you as wisdom, discipline, maturity. But there is a difference between structure that empowers and structure that imprisons. Saturn was once the great teacher, the archetype of mastery through trial, the god who sharpened the soul through friction. But somewhere along the spiral of time, that teaching was perverted. The cube became a cage, the hexagon, a harness, the ritual, a routine. And those who understood this hijacked the architecture of belief not to liberate, but to lock down. To prevent escape by convincing you there's nowhere else to go. But the architecture has a flaw. Symbols may transmit power, but they also transmit memory. The black cube that imprisons also contains the seed of release. In Kabbalah, the cube contains the tree. In alchemy, the cube unfolds into the philosopher's cross. In sacred geometry, the hexagon reveals the flower of life. What imprisons also encodes the way out, if you can see it. Because the most powerful prison is not the one with bars it's the one that tells you escape is impossible. That what you feel is merely cultural. That the symbols you see are coincidences. That the meaning is in your head. And so they distract you with spectacle, with news cycles, with identity games. While beneath it all, the same 6 walls hold. The same resonance hums, same cube sits, silent and satisfied, as you walk its corridors thinking you're free. But then something happens, a crack, a dream. A déjà vu, a symbol that stings instead of sedates. A question that won't leave you alone. That's not chaos, it's memory waking up. And memory, true memory, is Saturn's undoing, because the soul's memory is non-linear. It doesn't respect sequence, it doesn't obey narrative. It floods, it overwhelms, remembers lifetimes in a breath, symbols before language, pain before names. And when that memory returns, the resonance of Saturn falters. The system glitches, the loops unravel. In part 5, we descend into the psychological weapons of Saturn, the fear of time, the illusion of karma, the guilt that keeps the wheel turning, and the techniques used to bind your perception to the cult's clock. Because Saturn doesn't just shape space, it shapes your story, and every story told too long becomes a spell. What if guilt is a technology? Not a feeling, not a flaw, but a designed frequency, embedded so deeply in the nervous system that it begins to feel like morality, like conscience, like truth. But what if it isn't truth at all? What if it's a leash, binding, subtle and ancient, encoded into the rhythm of time itself? Because Saturn does not only shape space with the cube, shapes narrative with guilt. It governs not only the geometry of the world, but the rhythm of your choices, spell of consequence, the illusion of karma. They say karma is justice, that you reap what you sow, that every action plants a seed, and every seed bears fruit. But who decides the soil? Who counts the harvest? Karma, in its purest form, is balance, cosmic cause and effect. But the Saturnian interpretation is not balance. It is punishment disguised as law. A treadmill where guilt is recycled. A system where the soul is kept looping not to evolve, but to pay. Ask yourself, who benefits from a soul that feels perpetually in debt? Not God, not truth, but the machine. The Saturnian cult mastered this. They didn't need to make you fear death. They only needed to make you fear judgment, a reckoning, a review. A cold mirror waiting after the last breath, whispering not good enough. Try again, and so you come back. Not from joy, not from curiosity, but from fear. The soul that believes it has failed turns voluntarily. This is the trick, the trap, the cosmic bureaucracy. And it doesn't require demons or devils only. Guilt, self-administered, quiet, persistent. You were taught to call it conscience, but it was programmed as limitation. In mystery traditions, Saturn ruled over the third eye before the veil. It distorted vision by overlaying structure on perception. You didn't see what was there, you saw what you were told should be there. You saw a god of justice, and not a system of delay. You saw your life as a trial and not a dream. You saw your return as growth, not entrapment. This is the spell. The loop of self-correction so tight, you never question the correction itself. And so time becomes tyranny. It's not because it passes, but because it judges. Every second becomes a sentence. Every year, a ledger. You measure your worth by your age, your success by your schedule, your legacy by your deadlines. You live not in the moment, but in delay. Later I'll rest. Later I'll awaken. Later I'll remember. But Saturn is the god of later, and later never comes. Saturn's control is not brute. It is ritual. You wake at a time you didn't choose. Work for hours you didn't design. Eat when you're told. Rest in windows. Retire on cue. Die in rhythm. It doesn't feel like imprisonment. It feels like responsibility. Like being an adult. Like being realistic. Adon. The while the soul shrinks. The memory dims. The child who once knew how to dream dissolves into roles. The artist forgets the vision. The mystic forgets the silence. All sacrificed to the altar of productivity, Saturn's great ritual. Even the very concept of awakening is timed. You are sold 7 steps, 21 days, 30-day resets, milestones. As if the soul unfolds like a marketing funnel, as if the infinite can be scheduled. This is Saturn in disguise, the calendarization of truth. And you wonder why you feel behind. Why awakening never sticks, why peace never lasts. Because you are measuring the eternal with a clock built to reset. But there is a crack in the clock. It's found in the moments outside the pattern. It's a pause between thoughts. It's a space between rituals. The breath before the judgment, it's not loud. It's not glamorous. It's still. And Saturn hates stillness that isn't structured. Because that kind of stillness, pure presence, is the soul's native state. And in that stillness, the guilt dissolves. Because there's nothing to fix. No karma to repay. No past to apologize for. Only the now. And the now is unrepeatable. The ancient mystics knew this. They didn't fear Saturn. They passed through Saturn. They used its structure to build the ladder, but not to stay on it. They honored time, but did not bow to it. They remembered that the soul is not a product of sequence. It is a flame. It burns now, always now, and no ring, no cube, no clock can contain it once it sees itself. But the cult of Saturn has one last defense: distraction. It gives you spiritual systems as complex as the trap itself, Hierarchies, rankings, levels, attainments. You trade one prison for another, one cube for a shinier cube, one symbol for a trend. This is not escape. This is refinement of the ritual, a more beautiful cage. So stop not to rebel, not to fight, but to see. See the spell of guilt for what it is, a script, an overlay. It's not truth. And the moment you stop reciting it, the story loses power. In part 6, we confront the gate itself, the final resonance of Saturn, the guardians of the veil, and the one question that breaks the loop. What if you were never meant to return? Because not all cycles are sacred. Some were built to end, and it begins with remembering. There comes a moment quiet, absolute, when the soul stops asking to be saved and begins remembering it was never trapped. It is not loud. It does not shake the heavens. It unfolds like the soft tearing of old fabric, a gentle unraveling of the veil you didn't know was stitched into your perception. This is the final threshold, the gate of Saturn. It's a place where all the loops converge. And what you find here is not a monster, not a jailer, it's not even a god, but a mirror. Cold, geometric, honest. It does not judge. It does not punish. It reflects. And that is what makes it terrifying. Because most do not fear Saturn itself. They fear what Saturn shows. You see, the gate was never locked. The cube was never sealed. Prison was maintained not by force, but by agreement. Agreement to forget, to loop, to fear stillness, to confuse structure with safety. And in that forgetting, the gate appeared impenetrable. But it wasn't. It only waited for the moment you stopped rehearsing your story. The story is the key. You were born into a world already scripted, given a name, a nation, a lineage, taught a history that began with war and ends with progress. You were told you were broken, but fixable, guilty, but redeemable. And the price of redemption, obedience, time, effort, karma. But this was the lie, that you needed to be fixed, that you were ever incomplete. The gate of Saturn demands you abandon the story, not because it was false, but because it was never yours. It was a ritual of return, written to keep you circling a center you were meant to transcend. And so the final ritual is not ceremony, it is refusal, not rebellion. Refusal to forget. Because remembering is the only power they cannot replicate. At the threshold, the illusions unravel quickly. The idea of linear growth collapses. The myth of sin burns. The authority of time disintegrates. What remains is the soul silent, naked, outside context. And it remembers I was never bound. I chose to enter. Not as punishment, but as descent. Descent to retrieve some fragment of the divine that had fallen so deep it could only be retrieved from within. You weren't sent here. You volunteered. And the moment you remember that, the gate opens, not outwards, but inwards. Because Saturn was never the enemy. It was the veil, the guardian, the initiator. It is the final challenge before truth. In the oldest initiatory rites, Saturn was the father who devoured his children, not out of malice, but to delay their rise. Because premature awakening leads to madness. Only the soul that passes through density, limitation, form, and returns with clarity is worthy of the crown. Saturn withholds until you see through the withholding. And that moment, that clarity, it cannot be taught. It arrives like thunder without sound. You see the pattern in its entirety and it no longer binds. The symbols no longer seduce. The guilt no longer returns. The loop is seen for what it was, an offering, not a trap. But make no mistake, those who serve the Saturnian current do not celebrate your return. They fear it, because a soul who remembers cannot be controlled, cannot be taxed, cannot be seduced by ritual or rank. It radiates a frequency that disrupts the spell, a frequency that reminds others, and that is the true threat. So they will distract. They will seduce. They will offer new loops dressed as freedom. Movements, doctrines, new ages with old chains. But if you have passed through Saturn's veil, you will see them for what they are. Echoes of a frequency that no longer governs you. You are not above the system. You are beyond it. But this transcendence is not escape. It is presence. A re-entry into the dream, not as prisoner, but as lucid architect. You move through the world without being moved by it. You speak in symbols without being bound by them. You live in time, but time no longer lives in you. That's what changes everything. Because you will still see the cube, the rings, the robes, the rituals. But now they are transparent, hollow. You can walk through them. And in your presence, others begin to see the cracks, to feel the hum beneath the symbols, to awaken without violence. That is how the cult ends. Not in revolution, not in blood, but in quiet remembering. The gate of Saturn becomes the door of return, not back to form, but back to essence. And you carry that essence through the dream, whispering not truth, but memory, not doctrine, but resonance. You become the silence that cannot be interrupted. And the loop forgets you, because you no longer feed it. And so the symbol dissolves. But this is not the end. It is only the beginning of the next descent. Because if Saturn was the veil of structure, what lies beyond structure is not chaos, but infinite becoming. And something waits there too older than Saturn, beyond even the silence. A frequency not of containment, but of birth. That is where we go next.